Peace. Let's get it popping. Peace to the Nubian family. Give myself a second here, give everybody a chance to join in. Yeah, if somebody's in the chat, if you guys could just give me a quick thumbs up, let me know you guys can hear me as well. All right, gracias, Akti. Kashia, how you doing today? How you moving? Shalom. Yeah, put on some music, give it about 5 minutes so people could trickle in. Bobby Randy, peace to the Lone Star State. How you moving today, brother? You get that running? My foot's still killing me from last time. Glad to see you moving well, sister Kashia, gracefully as you said. I'm doing strong. I'm actually in California right now, enjoying some beautiful weather. It's let me check my phone here. I think it's 85 degrees. Yeah, it's 85 degrees right now, and they anticipate it being 91 degrees tomorrow. So I'm doing strong. Oh, and I'm also out here working on my album. That's been a mental gymnastic. I've never put together like a cohesive album, so I'm using creative muscles and juices that I haven't used in a long time. Get some music going. Take the boys to the roller skate. That's what's up. Tell Big R and tell Little R I said what's up. I hope those gloves are working out for him quite well. Yeah, cause I think you're in North Carolina, correct? It's definitely a different beast over here in terms of the weather. Also in terms of just society in general, everything's locked down right now to COVID. Shit, compared to like North Carolina and the southern states, it's like that's regular life. Over here, it's like I shouldn't say being in the penitentiary, but everything's locked down. Like you can't even sit outside and eat or anything like that. Yeah, 55 isn't bad. 55 isn't bad at all. Cool. So I'll give it about 2 more minutes. And then after that, I'm going to go ahead and jump right into it and get some music playing.
Is you ready? Yeah. Say, I love you, Dada.
I love Dada.
Say, where's Yam?
Where's Yam?
Where's Yam? Where's
I'm going to grab the insert, y'all, and I'll be right back.
Yo, I got tired of idolizing someone else, so I put mirrors in my ceiling just to look up to myself. Fuck advice, I'd rather take it from myself. I'm hard-headed like I got ceramic layers in my scalp. The OGs never offered any help, didn't want to give us a hand, we went Leopold to Belch. The new hoopty got a finger in herself. The coop roof is like I got rid of the shingles in the felt, nigga. I just gave Alicia keys and told her board the plane. If things don't go as planned, you don't know my name. Gotta play it like most Def at the diner, ho. They forgot, so Fidel had to remind them hoes. We the niggas with the mainstream flows leak through. Even though we underground like the old people, I put a brick in the oven, that's that FFC2, and watch it cook like the stove
Cool. All right. Whew. This is gonna be a long one, y'all. Let's go ahead and get started. Before I even start this, if you've seen the movie, it's not a linear movie, so as I present some of these ideas and concepts, it's not going to be a linear concept either. Also, just due to the length of the movie, there's if I go like linearly, hey, peace, YG Gutter, how you doing today? If I go linearly in the movie, we'll be here all day. So what I've done in my notes is I went through and I've picked out critical elements in the movie. Like she said, go for the ride, go for the ride. I've picked out critical elements in the movie, and then I've picked out critical concepts that I digested from the movie, and I feel like it's important. So, per the usual, just to take care of the proper and polite etiquette, I give a shout out to Chief Yuya and to our Nubian brothers and sisters for being able to, speak on this platform and express my ideas. And then I also want to give a shout out to Adika Butler for helping me with some of the stuff that I came across and, just being a mentor to me over the years. So let's go ahead and get into this thing. There's there's like three concepts that I feel like are the core of this movie. The first one is receptivity, being obedient. The second one is supreme mathematics, and then the last one is the concept of God. And through those three modalities, you see that explained throughout the movie. So, Tenet, we'll start with that right there. Tenet is a principle, a belief, a doctrine, something that's generally held to be true, especially one held in common by members of an organization, movement, or profession. So that works for this movie because you see the concept of faith is essential and a core theme in this movie that without that philosophy operating in the background, this movie wouldn't have been able to be accomplished. So Tenet is what's called a palindrome. If you don't know what a palindrome is, it's a word that can be read same forward and backwards. So Tenet is obviously a palindrome. The inspiration for this movie, though, comes from a palindrome, an ancient palindrome actually called Rhoda Square. And basically what it is, it's a 5x5 palindrome where if you read these five different words, or if you read these five different words, they read the same way forward to back. And then I think it's also top to bottom as well if you read these words. If you didn't catch it in the movie, those five words are Rhodas, Opera, Tenet, Arepo, and Seder. Seder is the antagonist of the movie. Arepo, he was the person who sold the Goya, which we'll get to. Tenet, that's the name of the movie. And like I talked about in my Inception breakdown, 10 has to do with Dios, one, the knowledge, the God. Tenet, this whole movie is based around the concept of 10 minutes. And then opera, which you saw at the beginning of the movie, when the movie started in the opera, and then Rhodas. So Rhodas was the name of the company who made the machines for the turnstiles, and anytime they needed to be inverted or go back the other way, Rhodas was the name of the company who made the machines that allowed them to get into that. So there's the concept of the Rhodas. As far as what this 5-line palindrome means, I wasn't able to come across anything that conclusively define what it means. But from what I gathered, it's essentially ancient, for lack of a better word, we'll call it a sigil, something that people use to describe deep messages. And I'll get into it here, but use deep messages to describe metaphysical meanings, right? So going back to that palindrome of Rhodas, Opera, Tenet, Arepo, and Seder, based upon my research, they say that those are the 5 nails. Peace, Sister Queen. How you doing today? Based upon my research, those are the 5 nails that they used to crucify the cross, right? So the thing that's interesting about that is that when you rearrange these words, I wish, and there's going to be some research that you guys have to do on your own to kind of visualize what I'm saying, but if you arrange those 5 words that I just gave you into a crucifixion, it actually says Pater Noster, which is Latin for our Father, and our Father are the 2 first words in the Lord's Prayer. What you'll see throughout this movie, and I know this day and age is probably not something that will be well received. This movie is really about patriarchy, right? And it's about the absence of patriarchy and the chaos that descends on the world when patriarchy is not present. So going back to that Pater Noster concept, there's part of it where the A's and the O's from the palindrome aren't into it, and they sit above and below the cross. And what the A's and the O's represent is the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. And what you see in this movie is that the protagonist, he is the beginning and the end of the movie. And for the record, this whole movie is a palindrome, right? So I'm not gonna go through the whole thing because there's a point at the movie where it doesn't necessarily look like it, but you hit like a certain point in the movie and everything is just re-happening again or reoccurring again. So keeping that concept of Pata Nestero, that master builder, that's what this movie is really about. So something I wanted to point out about this movie, I talked a lot about it in Inception, but this movie is similar to Inception, but it's a lot of different. It's different as well, and I think they're similar in the sense that there are metaphysical concepts, but I think this movie is more toes down on the ground, right? So when you went into Inception, there was like these concepts of like dreams within dreams, and you have the concept of time travel here as well. But the thing that I appreciate about this movie, and it's like Chief says, the sign of a peace sister. Arlene, how you doing today? It's like Chief says, the sign of an alpha male is one who knows what his community needs when they need it. So if my community needs, food and water, I'm not going to be the person who's talking about the stars and the sky and stuff like that. And I feel like that's what this movie is more about, where, like I said, there's deep concepts in it, but it's not necessarily the magical, miracle, spiritual, spirulina, vegan eating type of thing. It's more like focus on what's being done. And I think something that Christopher Nolan did that conveyed that was he called the character the protagonist, right? So the character doesn't have a name or anything, and that he also doesn't give like a lot of background information or background character development, because people tend to start to identify with the character, I think, as opposed to focus on what's actually taking place in the movie. So that's something just to keep in mind going forward. um, Something else I wanted to point out in this movie, just to give people an understanding of it, is Chief has talked about the difference between the Messiah and the Christ. So if you want to understand kind of how that relates to this movie, the Christ would be John David Washington moving forward in this movie, and then the Messiah would be the future version of himself, coordinating everything so that he can be exactly where he needs to be when he's supposed to be there. So one of the interpretations for the 5-line palindrome I was telling you about was the farmer or repo uses his plow as the form of work. Just a very rudimentary understanding of what that 5-word palindrome means. But going back to Chief's teachings on, or actually Brother Rahman, shout out to him, Brother Rahman, it was both of them actually talking about how farming will really teach you everything that you need to know in life, right? So it's the same thing with this movie. If you can see, for those who have the eyes to see and the ears to hear, the concept of being a farmer is there. There's the elements of watering certain aspects. There's the elements of planting certain seeds. And then there's also the element of being patient to everything that you see in the movie finally manifest. So I just wanted to keep that in mind as we move forward and you start to think about this movie. Something else I feel is really critical to understand this movie. If you go through this movie expecting to understand it linearly, the movie will not make sense. Think of everything in the movie, and it sounds cliche, but literally think, like, take what I'm saying for face value. Everything that's happening in the movie is to get the protagonist to a certain point. So even though it seems like they're jumping around and everything like that, the protagonist was the one who divinely orchestrated everything that you see in the movie. So even at the beginning, when he's sitting at the opera or when he's going into the opera, it seems like, oh, this is random and it doesn't connect to it doesn't connect until like the end of the movie. He was the one who orchestrated the whole thing. So if you can keep that in mind, and actually that's a deep lesson for life. The Asiatic black man, the maker, the ruler, the cream of the planet, the father of civilization, and the god of the universe is the architect behind everything that you see in existence. And it's the same thing with this movie. If you're not familiar, Ptah is the builder and Kemetic mythology. And if you can channel in on that energy, that will help you understand this movie a lot more. Shalom, Sister Manir. Well, you're doing well today. So like I was saying, the movie starts off at the opera, right? So when I think about opera, I think about music. When you think about the universe, universe literally means one verse of music. It's letting you know that this movie has to do, again, going back to Inception, primordial beginnings. The thing that I thought was cool in conjunction with the opera is that as soon as the movie starts off, you start seeing like guns being fired and everything. the way I see that is that the minute you step into the existence of duality, you begin to undergo your personal jihad, right? So that's what that scene was conveying. If you notice and pay attention to the numbers and the like the doors and the symbols and stuff in this movie, because it'll give you a good filter to see what Christopher Nolan is about to set up for that scene. So in this opera scene, you notice that when they start, they go into the G, right? And to reference our lesson yesterday in Supreme Mathematics, we know G is the number 7, G is God. So it's letting you know that, hey, we're about to step into the symphony of God and let you know what this movie is about. So in the opera, he talks to, he's going in there and he's supposed to be rescuing this dude, and this dude has something that he's looking for. But he says, we live in a twilight world and there's no friends at dusk. So basically, that's like Christopher Nolan's way of telling you that this movie, the way, and so let me backtrack for a second. It's like Chief said about symbols. This is what it could mean. You know, there's no definitive thing on what these movies mean or anything like that. So this is just my interpretation and how I perceived it through my filter of reality and through what I know. He says, "There's no friend. We live in a twilight world, and there's no friends at dusk." At that point in the movie, I took it as a sign from the creator to consider everything in this movie to be inverted, because there were some things in this movie that just didn't make sense to me, and I didn't like the message being sent from it. But when I thought about it from an inverted standpoint, it made a lot more sense. When I get to some of those points, I'll explain right there. But for mythological purposes and for the sake of the teachings of Anu, we live in a twilight world is basically like when Chief teaches us that we live in a Satan's world, right? And the further you go, also like Chief has taught us, before you study the metaphysics, get into the physics. If there's an all intelligent order, if there's an all intelligent energy that brings order to everything we do, then there's also an all ignorant energy that brings ignorance and destruction to what we do. So when we live in a twilight world, or when we live in a Satan's world, like Chief has taught us, everything about this reality is about the reversing of what the creator is striving to build. So that's what they were talking about right there. And you'll see that play out over the course of the movie. So they don't tell you what it is yet. They call it plutonium-241, but in the opera, they're looking for what they thought was a nuclear warhead at the time. And the dude who told him to look for it, he said, hey, it's in the coat. So I thought this was really interesting because, like I said, if you watch movies enough, you'll start to see personal synchronicities that take place in them. Last breakdown I did with Inception, I was talking about how Chief Yuya and his nomenclature is very similar to Joseph of the Bible, right? And Joseph of the Bible had a jacket, the multicolored coat. And in this movie, they said the algorithm, or the nuclear warhead is in the coat. So I always find it interesting how these synchronicities tend to pop up, because for a lot of us, our understanding of ourselves, our, no pun intended, our self-actualization happened with Chief Yuya. It happened in his coat. He's carrying the knowledge, he's carrying the wisdom, to teach us self-actualization so that we can bring about this own tenet in our own lives. As they're going through, and also something I just wanted to talk about, in terms of algorithms, it goes back to that supreme mathematics I'm talking about. Algorithms run the world right now, and I shouldn't even say right now. Algorithms have always ran the universe. Mathematics is the language of the law. So again, that's what this whole movie is about right here. And they're setting you up, they're just giving you a little bit at a time to get you to go into it. So during the opera scene, though, the protagonist, John David Washington, he's getting ready to get shot in the back of the head, and then somebody with an inverted bullet shoots the person who's going to shoot him. As you see that person running away, they have a red tag on the back of their backpack, and that's basically letting you know that that character was Neil. But that was the first time that you saw the character Neil. That was the first time you saw him in the movie, and that was the first time that you saw an example of something being inverted. So they go through the whole opera scene or whatever. Basically, John David Washington, he ends up getting captured. Actually, I want to back up for a second. So when he's sitting outside of the opera, there's a part where he's sitting in the van and he's playing with his bullet, right? Peace, 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 peace. Emmanuel. When you think about bullets, so this is the thing about the creator. The creator has a multitude of ways that it expresses itself. One of the ways that I found interesting that the creator expresses itself is through the use of guns. Um, People may say, "Oh, that's a violent thing or whatever," but there's a beautiful science and gun that can teach you a lot about life. When you think about the planets and you really think about any molecular structure, everything is spinning. We're on a nonstop journey through space and time, and the stronger and the faster the spin we have, the farther we can go in life, right? So when you see a gun shoot, it's the same concept, is that the barrel spins, and the longer the barrel as well, the more stable it is, and the longer it can go in space and time. So I say that to say, at the beginning of the movie, you see John David Washington playing with his gun and catching his bullet. It's like a subliminal way of the creator saying, like, yo, this is the architect of it all. Right now, he's just sitting in the back of a band playing with the bullet or whatever, but he's the one who's in charge of all of this. And then also, the dude says, wake up the Americans. I'm going to get to a point about my theory on this having to do with the Hebrews, but we already know who the real chosen people of God are. And actually, I'll go ahead and address it right now. Throughout the theme of this movie, it's telling you how important the black man is. And think about it like this, right? So if I build a sandbox and then I tell a child to go into a sandbox and I say, hey, build me a castle. They build me a castle, kick the castle down. And then I say, hey, build me a house or build me a mermaid. No matter how elaborate or divine those buildings they might make in a sandbox, it's still built with sand. And because I'm the progenitor of that sin, that child could never build anything without my blessings or without my essence in it. So it's the same thing with this reality that we live in, because the Asiatic black man is the architect of this reality. There is nothing that nobody can ever build in this reality without the essence of who we really are in it. So you see that starting to manifest in movies where you see a black protagonist and people are trying to act like it's so racially progressive. But the reality of the situation is that we've just reached a point in the space-time and continuum where we have to tell that story. And you see that happening in this movie where it can't happen without John David Washington. Like, they need him. They need the black man. Peace, brother Zach. Peace, brother Zach. Man, he probably down the street. Might go run, hop in, do a jog, and go and see you after this. Nah, I'm just playing. I'm working on the album. But so yeah, you see this black man or whatever, and he's the protagonist of the movie because it's that time for that to finally happen. So you take him out of the opera or whatever, and then you see him sitting on the train track. So this is a really, really important part right here, right? And it's so small things where if you're not really paying attention, you won't see the value and what's being conveyed to you. So peh in Hebrew means like to open the mouth, right? And patah is an Egyptian deity, like I said, that has to, which I think is the foundation of this movie. And when it comes to the opening of the mouth ceremony, it's like the building of the universe. It's speaking everything into existence. It's the 1, 2, 3. It's the abracadabra. So you see John David Washington right there, and after the opera, they're pulling his tooth out. So the way I equivalate that is basically the opera scene is, like I said, the big bang of the universe. Like, you have infinite amount of chaos, and then they're opening his mouth and they pull his teeth out, which is basically like him in a weird way kind of speaking things into existence. The thing that's interesting about this scene is that he said, you're almost at 7. So like we talked about, make it relevant to supreme mathematics, 7 is the number of God. And we just saw the G in the opera. So we already see the direction where this is starting to go. The thing that I thought they are, brother Zach, they are secretly distant black folks. I'll get to that at the end of the movie. But I felt like, how can I explain it, man? It's like it's like we talked about, and I knew it's like half-ass apologies. Where, all right, we'll put you in the protagonist role, and peace, chief. Tada, I get Chris for the share on the bootstrap paradox. Indeed, indeed, indeed. Yeah, we'll give you the truth about who the original man is, but we're gonna put him with this tall, white, geeky looking woman. Just and it's not even to be like colorist or anything like that. Just in terms of genetics and people actually being in a real relationship, that's not something that seems realistic or anything like that. So anyways, he's sitting out by the train tracks. The way I look at train tracks in Christopher Nolan's movies are pretty much like the tunnels to Set. For anybody who studied Kabbalah, the tunnels to Set are basically the tunnel to the backside of the tree of life. And I think it works for this movie because he's getting ready to go into the afterlife. He's getting ready to go into an inverted world. So that's why you see the trains right there. Something that I thought was interesting, So in Inception, when Leonardo DiCaprio wanted to wake up in the beginning of the movie, the kick was him falling backwards in the chair, right? But with this movie, John David Washington, he falls forward in the chair, and this is in opposition to Inception. So it's almost like he's falling forward to his destiny. Going back to that concept of the peh, the opening of the mouth. Like I said, this movie, in my opinion, is like about patriarchy and the importance of manhood. But when you talk about that peh, it's the opening of the mouth. And in the Quran, they call it the El Fatiha. I'm not pronouncing it right. The El Fatiha. El Fatiha. It's the opener, basically. So it's another way of the creator telling you, like, hey, this is the opening to the movie. This is the opening to the scene. This is the opening to the black man speaking his existence into reality. So you go from that part, we're on the train tracks, and they're sitting on the boat, and he's in the afterlife, and he wakes up resurrected on the waters. So Ptah, if you've ever seen him conveyed, he has scales on him. He's known as a builder, and then all throughout Egyptian mythology, you see references to the sun boat, water, the primordial waters, and and whatnot. So he's talking to what's the guy's name? I can't remember what his name is. Shalom, Ia Sequoia. I can't remember the guy's name, but he's sitting there talking to him, and he's basically saying, "Welcome to the afterlife." And he said, you passed the test that a lot of people wouldn't have passed, and you run into a burning building when most people wouldn't. The way I perceive that is that it's basically like coming to reincarnation. A lot of people don't want to come to this reality because the ignorance that comes along with it. But in my studies, in this reality, it's a transformation period, and for those who can make it through, it turns you into God. So he starts talking to him though about the nature of Tenet, and this is at the point when I have conflicting feelings about this. So he tells him that Tenet is an operation based upon knowledge divided. In my mind, when I think about knowledge divided, I think about like Satan, satanic, like breaking things up. And if love is connection and unity, then why should knowledge be divided? And to speak to Brother Zach's point, I think that's kind of what you start to see right here. But to give the movie credit, he says, to know its true nature, speaking about Tenet, is to lose. I think the way I perceive that is that when the egoic mind steps into divine orchestration or attempts to do the creator's job, the egoic mind destroys itself, right? Because the creator is infinite. It can see anything and it can perceive anything, where the egoic mind has limitations. So I think that's what Christopher Nolan was striving to convey right here. But it's still a major criticism that I have in the movie about knowledge being divided. Something else I wanted to point out, though, is that going off our teaching for supreme mathematics, the knowledge is the one. Going back to what I said at the beginning of this, the knowledge is the God. Knowledge is God. Knowledge is the law. So what they're telling you, and again, like I've said in my presentations before, our spiritual intuition should override, what they're trying to present to us in the movie. So we should be able to use our teachings from supreme mathematics and acknowledge that, hey, when they say knowledge is divided, they're really talking about the dividement of God. Cool. So he went through that. He was on the boat or whatever, anything like that. And he basically tells him about Tenet. He says, hey, you need to go talk to this lady so you can understand how Tenet works. So going back to what I said about the concept of bullets and guns and, God be a gun, you see a shout out to the beginning where the woman who's teaching him, what Tenet is, she teaches him how to catch a bullet, right? So what that made me think of was Kabbalah. Kabbalah literally means to receive. So many times in life, we're so focused on like giving to the world or, projecting from our limited ego state of mind that we've cut ourselves off to receiving, right? And if we open ourselves up to receiving, we receive Yah, we receive Allah, we receive the Creator's blessings. And it's funny because the way I perceived it is that when he went to catch the bullet, he looked like really awkward. His body, I imagine it was for dramatic effect. But the way I perceive that is the reason his body looked like funny was because we haven't received in a long time. Like we're so disobedient that when it comes time to actually sit down and receive, we look weird. We look inverted. It's like Chief said, the object of Satan's mission is to invert God's people so much that when God comes back for his people, they're not even recognizable no more. And I thought that's what was being conveyed right there. Going back to what I said about, from my personal intuition, something that helped me understand the movie, and I don't think this was Christopher Nolan's intention. This is just my personal bias. If you perceive everything in this movie as inverted, it makes sense. But if you try to understand it like on a superficial level, it's like some discrepancies. So you have an old white lady, scientific lady who's teaching him about the concept of Tenet, who's really teaching him about faith. And if we think about it in a healthy society, what can an old white woman who probably doesn't have a family teach, this black man about the concept of faith, right? But if you look at the movie as inverted, it's okay. This old skinny white lady would actually be a black, abundant woman full of wisdom. So it made sense in my mind at that part right there. Let me see what the brother said. It said Fatah is definitely connected to the concept of Fatah, Father, the earth opening in order to yield Allah's first attribute, and El Rahman, the yielder. Hey, indeed, brother. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that. Right. So when he's meeting that lady, though, he walks up to her and she said, with the high visibility vest and a clipboard, you can get almost anywhere. So the way I interpret that is that you can look the part, you can have on the clothes, and you can even have a high visit, or you can have a clipboard, which would be like the Bible, the Quran, or anything like that. You can get almost anywhere with that, but you can't get into heaven. And at that point, he says to her, obscure tenet. Tenet is like a belief or a faith, basically. So he's saying, not only do I have the look, not only do I have the book, but I also have the faith as well to get me to that next stage. So I thought that's what that part meant. Like I addressed in the beginning of this, if you notice in this movie, you could say subliminally or not subliminally, they're telling you like, hey, we need the original man to come back and fix this mess that we've created. And the process of it, though, when she's teaching him how to catch the bullet, or she's teaching him about the process of inversion, she tells him, don't try and understand it, just feel it. It's like Chief was teaching us in the Supreme Mathematics last night when we were all, projecting our own form of knowledge on what we thought. And it's like, yo, just focus on the basics, right? So when we step into this way of living, to this our new way of living, not that there's anything wrong with the understanding, but we project our own dysfunction on it instead of just going with the process. And ultimately, she tells him, how do you catch it? And he says, it's instinct. Instinct is what got us into our new. It's the feeling of, man, this is where I'm supposed to be. This is the right thing I'm supposed to be doing. And to some people, might look like you're inverted or moving backwards. But like he said, how did the bullet drop? With free will? Basically, they were going about the concept of cause and effect. And she was explaining to him, like, you are the effect and you are the cause. You are the alpha and you are the omega. And it's the same thing with, I'll keep that one to myself. But yeah, if you can master that concept of cause and effect and take that to, the end of this movie, you will see what Christopher Nolan was striving to convey with that. Cool. So basically, yeah, she explains to him how Tenet works and everything. He tells her he's not seeing the end of the world or anything. And then she explains to him that somebody who has an advanced inversion machine that could turn back the hands of time and history. So from that part, they go to Mumbai. Mumbai, so they talking about bullets. And like I said, bullets and guns are at the core of this movie. And like I said, the reason I think they're at the core of this movie, it has to do with the concept of God and everything being spinning projections to put into existence. And they're trying to control the projections, the things that are into existence. Yeah, Sequoia really was a good movie. No exaggeration, I think this was probably like my 10th time seeing it. And I went back today and I was taking notes. So I'm still having to go back and process little things. So they go to Mumbai, and the reason they're going to Mumbai is they're looking for somebody named Priya. Priya is supposed to be an underground arms dealer and everything like that. So like I said, if you could think about this movie inverted, things will start to make sense, right? So usually when you see people in movies and they have to go into somewhere covert or something like that, they come in from a parachute. You can use Christopher Nolan's Batman movie when he came in on the C-130 and Batman came and kicked in the plane. This one is different. Rather than starting up here, they start on the bottom, and he bungee jumps rather up the building. What that's symbolic of is basically like him saying that he's raising in Kundalini. He's rising up the pillar of Jed. He's riding up that spinal column. He's rising up Jacob's ladder. That's what they're conveying with that part. And just to bring any or to clear up any doubt about it, the character's name that he went to go see was Priya. And Priya basically etymologically is phonetic to fire, which is the root word for pyramid. So basically, he was saying, "Hey, I'm going to see the fire, the Kundalini rising." To keep up with the theme of inversion, though, she says, having a masculine front in a man's world, has its benefits. And right there, you see the inversion between the dynamics between her and her, where you think Priya, or no, I'm sorry, Sanjay. Sanjay was the man that he thought was running the inverted ammunitions business, when it was really, peace, Alex Lugant, when it was really her. Something though, like I said, to really understand this movie, at this point, when I first watched it, I was trying to figure out, like, yo, why is she controlling the bullets? Like, why is he going to see her and everything like that? They're working back in time, so everything that you see happening right there is divinely orchestrated, meaning that he put himself in that position so he can get where he needed to be in the future. Let me go to the comments and see what Chief said. This solution of the mathematics, the algorithm is broken in 9 parts. Priya, the Hindu creator archetype. The scientist's name was Barbara, meaning foreign, but inventor scientist is a known female. Yeah, exactly, Chief. Exactly. I don't know if you got to see it at the beginning of the presentation. I was saying I felt like this whole movie was really based around, supreme mathematics. And if you can keep that in mind, it will give you a pretty good understanding on what the movie is about. So after that part, he goes and sit down with Michael Caine. So as I pointed out in my breakdown Inception, Christopher Nolan tends to bring this Saturnian energy to his movies, and rather than Sato and Inception, he calls him Saturn, or he calls him Satyr, which is from the Rhoda Square, but also that's the name of the character. Something that I found was interesting about this was so Goya, I think he was a painter from like the 1700s. He was a Spanish painter, and they ended up kicking him out of the church, and he started having mental diseases. Pretty much your Vincent van Gogh kind of guy. I think he cut his ear off as well. Don't quote me on that, but he either cut his ear off, he lost his hearing or something like that. But one of his paintings that he's famous for, Goya, is a picture of Saturn, Kronos, eating his children. And I thought that was interesting in terms of everything that you hear going on with the quote-unquote PC. What the Chief said? Yes, I did hear that. I'm doing your amen cosigns over here. Yes, sir. Gracias, Chief. Yes, sir. Gracias. You see the picture of Kronos eating his children. Like I was saying, considering Pizzagate, everything that you see going on right now, I thought that was really interesting. And then you think about like just the concept of the movie, Satyr wanting to go back and basically eat the past and everything, that has happened in the past. Michael Caine's in this movie again. No surprise there. He's a Christopher Nolan favorite. So basically at this part, he kind of explains to him how he can get involved, how he can get in contact with Satyr. And basically, in order for him to get in contact with Satyr, he has to go speak with Kat. So Kat is the tall, skinny, blonde chick. Let me see what she said. She said, I wanted the correlation between missing ears, hearing, and artists throughout history. How you do one thing is how you do all things, Sister Kashia. How you do one thing is how you do all things. I'm not saying that we're disobedient, but I wouldn't be surprised if they were. I know a lot of times people who, from what I've researched, they tend to have deviant sexual practices, so that's something to consider. But Michael Caine explains to John David Washington that the best way for him to get in contact through Satyr is through his wife named Kat. So the way I interpret that part, John David Washington, he goes and sits down with Kat. She explains to him about the Goya and everything like that. It's Gnosticism at its finest. For anybody who's not familiar with Gnosticism, there's the concept of Sophia, who's like the great mother. And basically, Sophia, if I remember correctly, she divorced from, going back to what I said, she divorced from the divine patriarchy and she started to create on her own. When she created on her own, she created an abomination. And what she had created, she was so ashamed of, she cast it into the abyss. It's called a demiurge, and the demiurge's name was Dalibra, according to Gnosticism mythology. And like I said, she was so ashamed of her creation that she cast it off into the abyss. And once the Dalibra was cast off into the abyss, he was in darkness, he was in ignorance, and he started to create basically what he saw reflected above him. and everything that he created, because it was an imitation, a reflection, and never lasted. And I think ultimately what happened was that the divine patriarchy had to come back and breathe the breath of life into all of her creations to redeem them. So when he's sitting down with the when he's sitting down with her, she's basically telling him the painting, the Goya, the art was Seder, her husband. That's her hold over him, hold over her rather. And the way that that happened, do a better job of explaining that, was that she had sold him a painting, and she didn't know that the painting was a fraud. So the person she said that sold him the painting was Thomas Arepo. Thomas in Aramaic means twin. As I studied this movie, I started to notice like a really strong twin energy. You see the reference to the red and the blue, the twin Kachinas, for anybody who's familiar with Hopi energy. And then in a weird way, you can kind of say John David Washington's character being inverted is also like twins as well. But she was saying that this person named Thomas Arepo sold her a fraud, which she in turn sold to her husband. And because of that, her husband keeps her trapped. You know, he has her locked up and everything like that. So I thought that was integrating the Gnosticism mythology, and that she's so invested into a fraud that she can't even get escape from it. And it's really like psychologically something that a lot of us have experienced. We're so invested into Satan's world that we can't get free of it. You know, in terms of our food, in terms of our natural resources, Satan has control over all of that. And if you don't know how, you can't break free from it. So he sits down with her, they go through that and everything like that, Gnosticism, forgery. So John David Washington basically tells her that he'd be willing to steal the art from her so that he could get close to Seder, but also break her free. And he also tells her, she says, I don't want a second chance at escape. She said, I want a second chance at, what's the word she used? Payback, basically. She wanted, you know, a second chance to kill him. So he agrees that he'll steal the painting for her and everything like that. At that part right there, I thought it was kind of awkward, and I had to go back to what I was saying about like the movie being inverted, because I was like, why would this black dude never met this chick a day in his life or anything like that, or her son? Like, why does he care so much about her? But I took the creator's spirit, I took the creator's intuition, and I said, okay, imagine this was actually this man's wife and child. Like, this was his original home. This is him going back to take what's rightfully his. Like I said, I don't think that's what Christopher Nolan was striving to portray in the movie, but for the sanctity and for the sanity of my own personal mind, that's the message that I'm going to take from the movie. So after that, they go to the Freeport. The Freeport is basically a place where people collect art, and so they don't have to pay taxes on the art. They keep the art there. There's a few ways I perceive that. One of them was basically like we talked about Inception, that it's the weighing of the heart. It's the Maya energy, where it's the confessions of Maya. I have never stealed. I have never, you know, basically the holy commandments. I have never done these things. So that's what he was saying at the heart. Like, when you go to the heart of who you really are, you acknowledge that like there's no tax to be paid here, because none of this stuff was here. None of this stuff was real in the first place. You're just here to admire the art. Interestingly enough, though, when he was talking to Kat, she told him that when Seder goes there, she said art is of no importance to him, because Sator, Freudian slip, Sator is only focused on the money aspect of it. And, you know, that's what you see rampant in Satan's world. He doesn't care about the quality of art. You know, you look at music, I mean, you look at life top to bottom right now, like the quality of everything sucks. And that's because they're not worried about the quality. They're worried about the quantity. They're worried about the money and things that you can make. Another way I interpreted the Freeport was the heart. It was like the heart chakra. You know, it's in the shape of a pentagram. And when I think about the heart, you know, the heart has 5 letters in it. Teeth has 5 letters in it. When you think about teeth, and this is going back to the beginning, when they pulled his teeth out, you have 32 teeth in your mouth. So it's basically like saying that divine breath, like he's going to the core of it, and he's going to deal with the energy and the conflicts that come up in that Freeport. Something, if you pay attention in there as well, she told him, they told him when they were talking about stealing the art out of the, what's the name of the things? They were stealing the art from the room or whatever. They told him that they would have 45 seconds till the halide kicks in, and then once the halide kicks in, they wouldn't be able to breathe. So this goes back to the Nation of Islam teachings, where it talked about the pilots on the mini bombers of the mothership would be 4.5 feet tall. I can't remember the brother I read it from, and I wish I could remember the name of the book, but he was talking about how the allegory of the mother plane was basically a meditation technique to destroy the concept of America in your mind. So throughout this movie, you'll see that number 45 pop up. You'll see the 45 seconds, and then you'll see as they transition from the rooms, it'll go from like 5 to 4 as well. So they go through, they conceptualize like breaking into the Freeport and everything like that. The way they break into the Freeport is through a plane. So I thought this was cool in contrast to Inception, because for Inception they had to go like way up in the sky. You know, they're flying this plane like, and it represents a high level of thought up there. Well, in this one, the plane is actually like on the plane of the heart, and it crashes into it. So the way I perceive that is that this person has mastered this high level thought, and it's time to bring it down to reality. It's time to bring it into the heart. And it's like Chief was teaching us, you know, the Messiah coming down and the Christ coming up. The Messiah has finally touched down on the ground and is crashing into the Freeport so that it can go ahead and explain this, or so can it go ahead and do its mission. And that again speaks to what I was saying at the beginning of this movie. So the way Christopher Nolan constructed this movie was that it was supposed to be paying homage to a James Bond type of movie, right? So there's deep metaphysical concepts in this movie, but it's not as deep as people would think of Christopher Nolan be. You know, it's pretty straightforward for what is being conveyed in the movie. And again, I think that's represented by the plane, you know, just riding straight into the Freeport. Something that you saw was when the Freeport is the first time he comes in contact with his inverted version of himself, right? And when he comes in contact with the inverted version of himself, you see him get stabbed in the right arm. If you study astrology, the concept in Gemini governs the arms, and when you study Gemini, it also has to do with the twins. And like I was saying at the beginning of this, you see a strong twin energy in there, going back to Thomas and everything. But also the right arm has to do with grabbing the throne. And I've noticed this in a lot of movies. The protagonist tends to suffer an injury in their right arm, and I guess, or not, I guess, as it was taught to me, you know, anytime you go to grab something with the right arm in the throne and you're suffering an energy or an injury to that right arm, it's because you're receiving, you know, they don't want to see you grab the throne, but you got to go through it. If anybody wants to see a reference to it, Darth Vader lost his arm, Luke Skywalker lost his right arm. You know, there's references in it all throughout movie. So a part that I also like, and this is my own personal bias right here. When I first watched this movie, when they got to the Freeport, like I had no idea what was going on whatsoever. Like I almost wanted to walk out on the movie because it doesn't make sense to me. But the way I interpret it is, another view I have for this movie is it's really about life, right? You know, we could pretend like we know a lot of things, but a lot of things we are doing in life are based upon the concept of faith. And that's what this movie was about, was, you know, Tenet, a concept of belief or faith, where it's like, all right, I really don't understand what's going on, but based upon the knowledge I have and the faith that I've cultivated, I'm going to keep moving forward. And I think that's conveyed in the movie because, like I said, or it's conveyed in life. It's kind of like that midlife crisis where people get to a point and it's like, man, I have no idea what's going on in my life. I don't have no direction. I don't know where I'm going or what's anything like that. But if you keep moving forward, you know, with the knowledge and the faith, you'll get exactly how you're supposed. You'll get to exactly where you're supposed to be. Like I said, at this point in the movie, you start to see it's a palindrome. So if anybody forgot, a palindrome is just something that you can read. You know, it says the same thing forward and backward. It's at this point in the movie you start to see like the formation of the palindrome take place, because you'll see it circling around back to that point. See if there's anything else I wanted to note for that. Cool. So there was a part when they were in the Freeport, and the whole reason they went into the Freeport in the first place was that John David Washington was supposed to steal the art so that he could remove Kat from the control of her husband, right? But he never stole the art. And the reason why he stole the art was because he hadn't had the divine revelation of who he was yet. And going with the narrative of the movie, you have to destroy the whole paradigm. Like, it's not even about taking back what's yours. It's about destroying the whole thing, right? So you see that happening in our reality right now. You keep seeing people talk about, we need to vote, you know, you need to be Republican or Democrat, when really that's not the answer. Like, this whole thing needs to come down. Like, this whole thing needs to be destroyed. So that's why at that point he hadn't stole the art yet, so he could redeem her. And like I said, you know, in redeeming her, if we want to add a spiritual layer to it, it would be like him. It would be like Osar redeeming Aset and Heru. And you hear Kat talk about that. She said, Max is my everything. Max is my Heru. And we'll get to that towards the end of the movie on why Max's character is so important. But once she realizes that the painting hasn't been stole, she was sitting there with Andre or Seder, which is the first time you get introduced to him in the character. And she's like all happy, she's all spirited and stuff. And she's thinking that she's about to get free. And then little did she know the painting is right there, on her food tray. And when she asked about it, he basically said, he had instincts in the future. Basically, he went back in time and he saw that they were trying to do. But it's also a shout out to what I was saying about the Goya paintings. How there's that picture that Goya is famous for of Kronos eating his children, and then here you see, her getting ready. She thought she was gonna eat, but it was an old painting. So John David Washington uses the painting to get close to Seder. Uh, the reason he wants to get close to Seder is he wants to understand the concept of reversion or tenet. So it's a weird trick because if you watch this movie enough, you start to think that John David Washington or the protagonist understands Tenet the whole time, but he's moving ignorant through the movie. Like, he has certain characters telling him, go do this, go do that. And that's what brought him to Seder in the first place. And that's really a life lesson right there. We think we got it figured out. We think we got the knowledge. And you'll hear people say, I did it by myself independently. But really, through the course of our life, Chief Uyah, plenty of people have given us divine sequencing to get us to exactly where we need to be. So that's what you see taking place right there. And they end up going on the boat or whatever. They fall off the boat. Kat tries to kill him. She couldn't kill him. And then John David Washington hops in the boat, or he hops in the water. And he ends up saving Seder. After he saves him, though, he talks about how one man's probability for death is another man's possibility for life. When you think about the nature of anything in life, everything has a season. Everything is constantly dying and coming back to life. When I've heard people talk about the state of the black man, a lot of times they ask, why did this happen to us? How did we fall? And I think people just overlook some basic stuff. Like, we'll use the concept of being woke. If I'm so woke that I'm up on, 24/7 for a week, there's going to be some point when I finally have to crash and I finally have to sleep. And there's nothing wrong with that. When that happens in our everyday walk of reality, like, oh, that man got it in. It's time for him to go to sleep so he can get rest, get up and do it again. A lot of times we localize our consciousness instead of thinking, big picture. It's like the Honorable Elijah Muhammad taught us, we're 66 trillion years old. If we've been woke or we've been awake for so long, there's going to be a point where we naturally fall asleep. And I thought this part in the movie was kind of a shout out to, from a mythological standpoint, we'll talk about Yaqub's creation in the island of Patmos, basically saying like the original man, his death gave the possibility for for Yaqub's creation to come out and exist. So that's what I thought that part can convey. He ends up talking, Seder ends up talking to Kat, and he basically tells her, he says, if I can't have you, nobody can have you. There's a certain energy and there's a certain type of people you see on this planet right now where, because they don't have the promise of everlasting life, that, hey, if I have to go down, if I have to be destroyed, I'm going to take this whole thing down with me. And like I was saying, how you do one thing is how you do all things. If you don't see somebody sustaining life, then they're probably the progenitors of destruction and aspire to bring everybody down with them. So let me go ahead and get into this next part. Let me see what Chief says right here. Much silence in Nolan, including the Seder Square. Seder, agricultures, a repo links to Tenet and the opera, the wheel, the Rotus plows. Yep, Patad and Stir earlier. Definitely. There was something else, actually. Let me go back, Chief. I wanted to bring it up. They confirm, this Patad and this builder energy. Did I put it back here? Patad Tenet. So I thought that was no coincidence. The fact that this movie is called Tenet, and there is a movie or there's a character that has to do with building called Patad Tenet, and I'll get to that towards the end of this presentation. Cool. Cool. So I'm gonna speed up in the movie real quick because, like I said, I don't want to walk everybody through the whole movie or whatever because some of this stuff is self-explanatory. It's just like watching an action movie. But I feel like there's a deep message in what was trying to be conveyed. So after he saves Sater or whatever, he basically sits down with him and he says, "Hey, I want to work with you to acquire the 241, the plutonium 241." So when I think about plutonium 241, I think about Pluto, the farthest planet in the solar system, and then I think about the number 241. 2 plus 4 plus 1, according to supreme mathematics, that's God, right? And when you talk about the black box of God, like, it makes a lot more sense. When you talk about Pluto, you're thinking about something that's on the farthest reaches of the solar system. So for somebody who's willing to go through whatever it takes to acquire the knowledge of God, that's why he's going through the concept of acquiring the plutonium 241. So basically, the way you see that whole process is a very, very long, drawn out. It was a dope like action scene to actually watch. But you basically see John David Washington. He's going through a car. He has to hop on top of a truck, go in and steal the box. And like I said, I want to explain the whole thing, but every person who's a man of wisdom and knowledge has a part of their life. At least I'm starting to experience where when they go through the acquisition of knowledge and wisdom, it's really not that deep. Difficult but deep, or not that deep. Very difficult but not deep. And you have to ask yourself, like, okay, what am I willing to do to acquire this knowledge? And you see John David Washington go through this whole elaborate part where he finally, gets the 241 back. And it's interesting because after going through all of that, actually, I'll share that for 1 second. Let me see what Chief says. Then Chief said, then the relationship to the drunken satyr, or Barberini fawn, reoccurring idea of the copies, plus the mythology of the King Midas, too, with the film and his relationship to the satyr he captured. I'm not as familiar with that mythology, Chief. If you feel gracious enough to share it, please do. Please do. I'm always down to learn. So, anyways, he goes through the whole concept of getting the knowledge back and everything like that. And then they've been trying to tell him throughout the whole movie the concept of what's happened, and to have faith. But because he hasn't been through enough experiences, quote unquote, in the movie, quote unquote, in life, his faith hasn't developed yet, right? So it's the same thing with us in life. Like, I remember I was in my early 20s, like studying metaphysical things, and I didn't view it as knowledge. I just viewed it as information, and I was an information whore. I took in a lot of information, and as deep as it was, it never really resonated with me because I didn't have a context for it to make sense. Fast forward to where I'm at now, what's happened has happened. Like, man, I love this movie because I'm able to look back and it's like, oh shit, all that stuff that I was learning about has allowed me to develop faith as I'm moving forward, because those things that I was learning about in my early 20s are applicable to where I'm moving at in life now. So, like I said, he goes through an elaborate process of getting the knowledge back and everything. So there's a part where, and every young person does this. After he gets the knowledge, he loses it. He gives it to Sater, right? So it's like a young person who, it's like the game is to be sold, not to be told. After he gets the knowledge, he ends up giving the plutonium 241 right back to Sater. In doing so, though, he was in a car bomb, and the car bomb, usually, when you see movies, or if anybody would have been in a car bomb, it would blow up. But because at that point in the movie, John David Washington was inverted, the entropy caused the explosion actually to turn into an ice bomb. And he said, "I think you're the first person in history who ever got hypothermia from dealing with the car bomb." The way I look at that is that when we go through our journey in life and our acquirement of knowledge, it's hard to go back. It's hard to look back at the things that we've been through and the traumatic experiences. So, say, somebody had a sexual trauma when they were young, or somebody was in the military and something messed them up mentally. More often than not, when we tend to go back to those experiences, we explode, we detonate. But for the person who's calm, cool, and collected, they can actually go back and look at what happened and get the knowledge from it that allows them to move forward. So that's what I thought was being conveyed with the car bomb scene. After the car bomb scene, Cat ends up getting shot in the ribs. They start to talk to him about the temporal pincer. So for anybody who's not familiar with the military, you have something what's called a spatial pincer, right? So think about like if there was a mountaintop or a hill, and I had a red team moving from this side, and then I had a blue team moving from that side. That's what a pincer is. When you think about a temporal pincer, You have somebody who's moving forward in time, and then you have somebody who's moving backward in time. And to give some clarification on what happened on that scene when they were on the highway, man, let me backtrack for a second. There was a whack part in this movie I did not rock with. So Sater hopped out the truck and Cat is in there or whatever, and the car is going reverse, which I thought was amazing in itself because I could barely drive a car backwards and I'm like actually driving it. This car was going backwards 65 miles per hour, had nobody driving or anything like that. And then John David Washington ends up hops in at the last moment and he hits the brake and he's able to save her. Like, I don't know, I just thought that was an unnecessary part in the movie, didn't really add anything to it. But the reason Sater was able to spring them and he saw everything that was happening that allowed him to steal the knowledge back was because they were moving with what's called a temple pincer. So say one half of Sater's team was moving forward, on the regular track of time, and then you had another part of Sater's team that was moving backwards, and they were able to see everything, and that's how they were able to spring it. Sister Kashia says she could have jumped in the front and saved herself. Yes, she could have, Sister Kashia, but she wasn't that intelligent. She was not that intelligent at all. So, getting back into the movie, they explained to them about talking to the future and talking to the past, right? In the beginning of the movie, they had said something that everything we do digitally speaks to the future. So like our cell phone bills, that's what the whole concept of this algorithm-based society is based upon. Where if you if you collect enough information and data, you could project what's going to happen into the future, and it also speaks to the future. But the question that was asked was, well, can the future speak back to us? And I think absolutely. Anytime you hear people start saying, "Oh, I keep seeing this number 44 here," or "I keep seeing these divine synchronicities," that's literally, we'll call it the future. Some people will call it the Elohim. Some people will call it Allah. But it's a certain aspect of yourself that's speaking to you in the past. It's just, do you have the eyes and the ears to see it? And something to consider this may be interesting. Something interesting to consider from this movie was they talked about how your forward moving version of yourself couldn't come into contact with your backwards moving, your inverted version of yourself, because they said the entropy basically would destroy the person. So that's something to consider. When people ask, well, how come I can't see the future version of myself? And maybe that was just the science in the movie, but maybe there is some actual science to it where, if you ran into that version of yourself, well, like they said in the movie, ignorance is our best friend. So I won't belittle that point. One thing he did say, so all right, this is when we're going to start getting deep into the movie. So basically, when they were at the Freeport, Sater had gone back or whatever. He took the knowledge, or he took the plutonium 241. They asked him about lying or whatever, and he told them, he said, "Hey, I was lying," and he said that's the standard operating procedure. Something, pay attention to the movies. They always do stuff like, and Christopher Nolan does this. He'll throw little words in right before he says something deep. So he'll say, "Jesus, I was lying." He's trying to tell you like Jesus was a lie, right? And like I said, I think this whole movie is about the concept of the Christ and the Messiah coming this way. So if the person who's moving forward is telling you like Jesus is a lie, the Messiah is really the person coming back this way, that's like a lot of wisdom to be interpreted right there. But for some reason, for some people going with the theme of the movie, it says ignorance is an ally, right? So we'll make fun of somebody who does believe in Jesus, but what if that person like had the utmost faith and they had the tenets of the belief that if they believed in Jesus just to a point that it got them to realize like they were the Messiah? I would much rather be that person, like a righteous living person, to get to that understanding than be a person devoid of faith and completely serving my ego. Because like we said, the ego is limitations. Like the ego has no divine orchestration or anything like that. It's limited in its existence. And you could say, "Oh, I don't believe in Jesus," or anything like that. But what has the worship of somebody's ego got anybody? So I thought that part was really deep. So yeah, he starts traveling back in time, and to speak to Chief's point, they start to talk to him about the algorithm. Like I said at the beginning of this whole movie is about supreme mathematics, knowledge divided. This is about the concept of being divided. What we talked about, the one, the knowledge, the nine being born. Sater wants to put it together. The protagonist wants to divide it. To me, like we said at the beginning, that doesn't make a lot of sense. But for the person who controls the algorithm, for the person who understands mathematics, they are God. They are in control of the planet. And if you look at the algorithm through the movie, it looks like a spinal column. It looks like the Jacob ladder, anything that reference that. He asked the question though. He said, if so, the future. I should explain this at the movie. Basically, what it is for Tenet is you have people from the future striving to destroy the past, right? And John David Washington says, well, if they are our ancestors, wouldn't destroying us destroy them? And then they start talking about the grandfather paradox. So what the grandfather paradox is that basically, if somebody from the future kills their father, before they're born, will they ever exist? And that's why it's called a paradox, because nobody knows. But Robert Pattinson, the dude from Twilight, he says, that's when the concept of parallel realities and things like that come in. When it comes to the ancestors, like, to me, that doesn't make sense that they would want to kill themselves, which is, again, another fundamental flaw I saw in this movie. Like, if we are the ancestors, who I am in the past is who I am in the future, why would I want to kill myself? That doesn't make sense. But he asked the question, and he also says, if we're still here, then that must mean we won. And that made me think, one, no pun intended, if we're still here, we are the God, we are the knowledge. But it made me think of Star Wars. In the beginning of Star Wars, how it talks about, like, in a galaxy far, far, far away, long, long ago, this story already happened. I think it's the same thing was taking place with us right now. Like, the reason we are here is because we won. And I don't even know that there's really anything for us to quote unquote won, but we are here because we always have been and we always will be. And we're still projecting ourselves on a nonstop journey through space and time. Chief says the short version: King Midas is founder, Dionysus at Tyrus, Silent is drunk for wine. Dionysus brought grapes to the east. Midas turns, Satyr, and Dionysus rewards him the curse. Oh wow, huh? Thanks for sharing that, Chief. I'm gonna look into that for my personal growth. So, Priya, like I said, Priya's name has to do with fire. Chief already talked about it and everything like that. Something she goes back and she talks to the protagonist or whatever, and this is after the protagonist had the 241 or the knowledge or the plutonium stole from him. He's like, basically, why did you put me on that job if you know how this job was going to play out? One, at this point, he doesn't realize that he's the person who orchestrated Priya to do this whole thing in the first place. But she said something that I thought was really, really critical. She said, you're not the only protagonist. So in the context of the movie, he's not the only protagonist. Neil Robert Pattinson is just as important to this movie. I might even venture saying a little more important if you actually pay attention to all the things that Robert Pattinson does through the movie. But I think it's important for the development of psychology to understand that, like, there's more than one Messiah. The person who gets caught up in, like, oh, I got to be the Messiah for my people, there's no room for nobody else. That's the ego. Like, that's the ego all day. This is supposed to be about, like, Metatron, all the original people coming back together and into that unified body. So she lets him know that, and then they start talking about the conception of Tenet. And this is just a theory I have, right? So she said Tenet wasn't created in the past. Tenet was created in the future, and it was sent into the past. So I have a theory that the pyramids weren't built in the past; they were built in the future and placed in the past. But when you talk about the concept of, like, being a Hebrew, I think it's something that we developed at, like, such a high mental awareness. I guess you could say, built it in the future and we sent it in the past, right? So something that I thought, like, I always look for divine confirmation when I come up with an idea like that. She said, well, the movie happens on the 14th. They keep saying, hey, we got to go back to the 14th and we have to start, the Tenet operation from that. I couldn't come up with this if I wanted to, but today is the 14th. What's the coincidences of me doing this presentation, on this movie, and the actual movie date is the 14th, right? But according to our supreme mathematics, the 14th is knowledge plus culture, all being born to power, right? So when I think about the culture of who we are, I'm a Hebrew, I'm a Moor, and the knowledge of that, brings me to power. That's divine confirmation right there, just observing this movie. So that's what they were talking about right there. So go through, and then based upon that, Ives and them to study. Ives and them decide. Well, Ives. Let me back up for a second. So him and Max or him and Neil rather. I'll get to the Max part. They go back in time because Kat ended up getting shot in the rib or whatever, and they had to go invert her so she couldn't die from the radiation. But in doing that, that whole part that you saw at the Freeport where everything was inverted, you ended up seeing that again, and you get to see it from the other aspect of it, where rather than being the person who's moving forward in time, he's the inverted person this time. And again, that's just another layer of the movie showing how everything is inverted and how everything that's supposed to happen has happened, and that's happened for a reason. Something I wanted to point out. So anytime somebody's moving red, that's forward. Anytime you see somebody moving blue, that's inverted. When I think about red, I think about gold. I think about like the root chakra. I think about foundation. When I think about blue, I think about illusion. And I think about like Satan almost. And not Satan necessarily like in a demonic way, but as taught by Chief Yuya, Satan is the destroyer. Satan is the reverse, the backwards of building, the destroying or the reversing process. So it's interesting that everything you see in this movie that's blue or is an illusion is moving backwards or is reversing. So something to point out if somebody wanted to look in more to the mythology aspect of it, there's the Hopi mythology, and it talks about the red and the blue kachina. If I recall correctly, it says the blue is like the messenger, and then the red is like the purifier, right? So I think that's interesting. I mean, yeah, I'll leave it at that. But you see the red and blue taking place throughout this movie, and if like I said, if you wanted to dig into it deeper, you can tap into the Hopi mythology. So there's a few things I wanted to tap into as far as like the overall theme of this movie. There was a song by Nas, I think it was called "One Time for Your Mind," but he was saying he roots for the villain. Whenever I watch movies, like I always, and I think this movie is a good exercise in this. It's Hegelian dialect. You know, you could call it a mental pincer if you want, but just studying both sides of the issue. And once you study both sides of the issue, man, that was actually a good breakdown Chief did on third order and fourth order thinking. But I think when you master like second order thinking or you master polarity, it takes you to third order thinking. But anyways, rather than focusing like on the protagonist solely, I thought about like what Sator's mission was and how does that, line up with what I believe in. And based upon this current reality that we live in, like Sator's plan makes a lot more sense than John David Washington's does, because John David Washington is fighting to like save a broken world, where Sator wants to put back knowledge. He wants to connect everything and get rid of all the BS. And I guess that's the movie twisting or whatever you have to destroy. You got to get a little bit of truth. You got to give the poison, but put some candy in it as well. So red, blue, Kachina. There's a part that's really, really critical so they go into this underground tunnel or whatever, and that's where the algorithm is, right? And this is right before Sator dies. But they have a deep, deep conversation, and it speaks to the point where I was saying that, like, really, if you're paying attention, Sator should be the one that you're rooting for in this movie. But he says something. He says, you fight for something you barely understand, with people you trust so little and you know so little about. Think about everybody in politics, people in Christianity, people stuck in all these religions that really don't know about it. And if you go into like these churches, they don't trust these people. Like, they have little faith. They really don't have no faith in it, but they're fighting to keep this alive. And he says to him, he says, your knowledge dies with you. Your faith dies and your knowledge dies, like an anonymous Egyptian builder sealed in a pyramid to keep it secret. Your faith is blind. You're a fanatic. Like, I don't know how much clearer it could get. He's telling you, like, yo, you're fighting for, and maybe that's Christopher Nolan's way of, like I said, giving you the truth as well. And to speak to Brother Zach's point as well, at the beginning, he's like, yo, this stuff that you fighting for, bro, like, this is not it. Like, listen to what I'm saying. Like, I'm trying to put, knowledge back together and trying to send this whole thing in a different direction. And if I recall correctly, when you study the Kachina, the red and the blue star, it talks about like the pole reversal. It talks about things going back for, reversing and going back to how they were. And to elaborate on that mythology a little bit more, if you think about like Neil as the blue aspect and John David Washington, the protagonist, as the red aspect, it makes a lot of sense because, like I said, the blue is supposed to be the messenger and the red is supposed to be the purifier. throughout the movie, Robert Paskin is going around and he's constantly fixing these little things, like doing the things that a messenger would, where John David Washington, the protagonist, he's the purifier, like he's the one who's taking care of business and getting things done. He also says to him that my greatest sin was bringing a son into a dying world. He said, without belief, I would be God. So you've heard Chief spoke on this before. You'll have people ask, do you believe in God, or just ask you these circular questions. And I don't believe nothing because be lie at the core of it. It's a lie. I'm striving for knowledge. I'm striving, to build and striving to build upon what I know. So Seder basically was telling him like, yo, without belief, I am a God. And if he doesn't have belief, that means he has knowledge. And just observing our mathematics, what is knowledge? The one, the God. So I thought it was an interesting turn in movies. Again, like I said, to understand this movie from my perspective, just consider everything inverted. And when you consider everything inverted, that kind of makes a lot more sense. And as I'm saying that, I guess there's certain parts that you have to pick and choose to make it make sense. But in reality, I'm a lot more in tune with what Seder had to say than what the protagonist had to say in this movie. So they wrap up that part. They end up taking the algorithm. In the process of doing so, Kat kills Seder. So Seder was on the boat, and then he ends up falling off the boat because she shot him in the heart chakra. He fell from 40 feet. So I guess that's kind of like saying the heart chakra is the fourth chakra. The false intelligence, the Saturnian intelligence fell from the heart chakra, and the true redemption happened. Let me see what Chief says. He said, check it out. When I'm chilling, I grab the Buddha, get my crew to buy beers and watch a flick film and root for the villain. One of the best songs of all time, Chief. So yeah, she kills Seder, and then they're sitting there at the end of the movie, and then everything starts to come to a head. And basically, Robert Paskin tells John David Washington like he's the whole he's the organizer of this whole operation, and basically that they've known each other for years, and as they move forward in the future, him will develop a better relationship. Here's another part that I didn't like about this. So if we're talking about knowledge being God, and they introducing this in the movie, they said anybody who comes into contact with the algorithm, they have to kill themselves. So it's like in the Bible, it says that anybody who looks at the face of God can no longer live. At this part in the movie, theoretically, they all came in the face with God and they were able to still live. I didn't rock with that. Like, it just didn't make sense. And I get it, you want to see the protagonist live and everything like that, but just a whole bunch of things that didn't click with them. There's a part that it made the movie, I guess, make more sense. So basically what the theory is that Max, Robert Paskin, is actually Kat's son. And you'll hear little certain phrases throughout the movie that lend a lot of credence to it. Like there's a part in the movie where Kat is talking about like the importance of saving Max, and she says Max is everything. So if you think about the role that Robert Paskin plays throughout the movie, he really is everything. Like nothing would have happened without him. You go back to the beginning of the movie, and there's that part where John David Washington was about to get killed, and then you see the inverted bullet come through and it kills the dude. You think about all the places that Robert Paskin was at, exactly the right place that saved John David Washington. And then you think about the end when they were in the tunnel and they almost couldn't get to the algorithm, and John David Washington had to come and he had to shoot him as well. So that goes back to what I was saying, where when I started this movie, I'm like, okay, that makes a lot more sense if that was the son. And from a mythological standpoint, Aset, Heru, and Asar, this story lines up more because, hey, he's having to save his divine family. With that said, I mean, it's still cinema, right? Like, you got this black, for people who don't know, man, John David Washington is a very talented individual. I think he played professional football. But you have somebody who looks, like a healthy black man, and he's invested in, all these white people, or I don't even want to take it there, but just people who don't look like him, and it made weak for the storyline. So my ultimate theory on what this movie is about is that I'll go back to the numbers. Today's mathematics, knowledge plus culture equals power, right? I was thinking about this movie. This movie is really about the concept of the Christ, supreme mathematics, but it's about this Hebrew culture. This Hebrew culture is so advanced and so beyond our conception that we just got to have faith in it, and it's something that's being sent. It's being sent down, through the times, being sent down through the time continuum through us. And I'll go back to the very, very beginning of the movie, how the start of the knowledge was in the coat. It was in Joseph's coat. It was in Yuya's coat. So Chief said Neil is definitely Max. That's how I saw it upon watching it too. Yeah, so that movie, man. Like I said, I really didn't think it was that deep. It was just super complicated because of how non-linear the movie was. But I think that's really how life is. If anybody's seen it in the Hindu mythology, it's like the Anuli line, the path to enlightenment is not linear. It's something that jumps in and bounces around. So you see that happen in movie. But once you grasp the movie, it's pretty straightforward. Like I said, supreme mathematics, and it starts with the one, and it's about knowledge divided. So that was pretty much my breakdown on the movie. I'm sure as soon as I log off, I'm gonna remember something I wish I would have said. If nobody has any questions, let me go ahead and pull up an announcement for Brother Lowe. Brother Lowe. Cool. So the next movie breakdown we'll be doing is Brother Lowe will be doing Shaka Zulu episodes 1 and 2, and then he said it's on YouTube and he'll post the playlist later this week. So I just wanted to give a shout out to Chief again for letting me be on this presentation and give this platform. Shout out to my brothers and sisters in Anu, and then a shout out to my brother Adika Butler for giving me some of the information. So if nobody has any questions or anything like that, Brother Lowe would say, I'm done. Cool. Thank you, Baba Randy. Gracias. Thank you kindly, Sister Kashia. Thank you, Chief. Cool. Appreciate you, Brother Zach. Yeah, this was a deep one, man. This was a deep one. I thought about going deeper, but we would have been here for like 4 hours, and I ain't no Brother Panic or anything like that, man. I wanted to, as you would say, Brother Zach, make it make sense. Make it make sense. Talk about inversions. What I found interesting was the actor who plays Max's real name is Laurie Shepard. Huh. Sorry, is that a woman, Chief? Huh. Thank you, Sister Manura. And give thanks, Sister Sequoia. Shout out, Brother Lagan. Yeah, that goes back to what you were saying, Chief, about the just Christopher Nolan and some of his gender bending concepts in this movie. I mean, even if you took what's her name, Kat, like she was not the most. I don't know. She kind of looked masculine to me. She looked like a certain. She was be funny here. Give people some humor. She looked like a certain tall person recently who. Never mind. Indeed. Well, cool. Like I said, everybody, I'm in the deep trenches of a creative process, working on my album right now. So as soon as I finish it up, probably be 2 or 3 months, I'll send it out to everybody. But again, peace, love, and light. And hold on. Chief said, no, the child actor who played Max, his real name is Louis. Yeah, I got that, Chief. I was just saying that to add on to that with the gender bender concept, like his Max's mom, Kat, like she's not the most feminine looking woman that I've ever laid eyes on, but I don't know, I'll probably crucify me for that. All right, cool people. I'm about to sign off and get back to work on this album. When I do breakdowns, I look at the actual actors and what they usually are in, and not just what they're playing in a particular film. Yeah, that's something I strive to do as well, Chief. That's something I guess I shouldn't say I strive to do, or I do strive to do it, but I didn't do it on this movie for some reason. I honestly wasn't even familiar with some of the actors in this movie, but John David Washington, he was in the Black KKK. Michael Caine, he's in all of Christopher Nolan's movies. And then from what I saw, Sater, I think they said he pretty much plays that role in pretty much all the movies he's in. I think somebody even said he was like in Game of Thrones or something like that. But if you have anything else you feel like sharing, Chief, that's relevant to, perceiving the movie through the characters, please share. Hey, peace, Brother Randy. I appreciate that very much. I hope you guys enjoy the roller skating. Get that 5K run in, brother. Cool. All right, brethren. Akis, I am signing off. Peace, love, and light, and shalom to the Nubians.